Hello everyone, Xandro Gaming coming at y'all with another video, and in today's video we're going to do an updated tier list video for the unionarena trading card game. And in this particular video we've taken the last tier list video that I did. You know, for each of these videos I will take off a couple of decks that maybe I put on from the previous sets, right? So normally when the new sets come out, I take all those new decks and then place them on where I think they can fit into the tier list. But to make this like not a million different decks, right, I go back through this list each time, and each of those decks that did not perform decently well in some aspect and I thought maybe they didn't need to be on there, I ended up taking off, right? So like for instance, for the Attack on Titan, right, I took off both the green decks. They were on here because I don't think that, you know, they're crazy strong, not that they're horrible decks. I don't think any deck in unionarena is just absolutely garbage, right? I'm just trying to give you guys in these a little bit better of a breakdown for what I think a competitive kind of tier list is, and then also adding all the new decks and give you some combination of what I think are the really strong competitive decks and what I think are the new decks coming into the set. So I took off a good bit of decks from our last list. Maybe I'll try to find a way to put both pictures in the thumbnail or something like that so you can see the difference. But I'm not going to name every deck that I took off, but just know if it didn't get any tops recently in any tournaments, even locals, I probably took it off. And then also just, you know, in my discretion, decks that I thought were okay to keep on here for talking purposes, so we still have some, I'll keep on here, right? Like Briggs. I don't think Briggs is crazy or top, but I do think it's still like a good, strong deck. But with that being said, I guess I'll just, you know, we're going to update this list and then add the new decks that I think are going to do particularly well. So since we talked about Briggs, I'll move the Briggs down to, you know, an outside looking in, I guess. I do believe in this deck a little bit. I don't think it is anything crazy by any means, but I do think it is still a solid deck. I don't know if I would consider it like a gatekeeper rogue tier-ish type deck. I do want to be a little more critical on the decks on this list. A lot of people ask me to give maybe a little bit less of a biased opinion and more of an analytical opinion. So I'm going to try to do that in this video. But I still do want to stick by my beliefs that I do believe in the Briggs deck. I think it is a strong deck and maybe just a little inconsistent, too slow for what decks do right now. But I have a couple people at our locals who play this deck and it's not bad. It's pretty strong. With that being said, we'll stay with Full Metal Alchemist decks. The next one on here is the Ling / Scar deck, and I think this is a, you know, a good solid rogue tier gatekeeper deck. If you've never seen this deck, it is really powerful if you don't know what to do against it, and I think the power ceiling of this deck's too high for me not to keep it in a really strong, you know, gatekeeper rogue tier kind of deck here. I thought that I had changed this to be different tiers to try to show you guys. I guess it didn't update it, but I was trying to be a little more specific about like tier 1, tier 2. Regardless, we'll just keep going with it because I already started the video this way. But what are other Full Metal Alchemist decks? The Homunculus deck, I think that it is still a solid deck. I saw a couple of tops in local tournaments, so I do think that this is a viable deck. But like I said, in a competitive scene, I think that this is one of your rogue tier-ish decks. I do want to be more critical. The gatekeeper / rogue tier decks is going to take up the majority of this particular list now, because I do want to be pretty specific about the, you know, 32 type-ish decks that I want to go in here, and really it needs to be less than that. So I'm going to be a little bit more strict. I think any of these gatekeeper rogue tier decks you could bring to a tournament, one of these top tournaments, a regional or something like that, and expect to do decently well in it. Whereas like gatekeeper rogue, you'll be trying to work a little bit harder to make that happen, I think. And then these ones on the bottom here, I kept in to show you that they're probably on the outside looking in. You'd have to try really hard, I think, to top a regional tournament with these particular three down here. That being the red JJK group and just a plain out Scar deck without the greed package. Full Metal Yellow, I think the Brother Duo deck is still really strong. It hasn't had a ton of showings. So with that being said, I do still think that it is a top 32 deck. I think it's a little bit better than the rogue tier gatekeeper-y kind of level. So definitely like a tier 2-ish deck. And it deserves to stay kind of in the spot. Maybe just put it down to the bottom of it until we get a little bit further. I think that should be the last Full Metal Alchemist deck on here. So that is it for the Full Metal Alchemist, and I'm not doing this in particular order, but let's go through on Bleach. Ringy Rush, We'll stay down here, Gatekeeper, Rogue Tier deck. I consider Renji Rush a different deck than a lot of people, right? Renji Rush to me is just you're playing the Renji type of deck where it's all the Renji Rushes, and a lot of people consider just Purple Bleach a Renji Rush. I hear a lot of people throwing that name out for this deck, and I don't think that that's the same kind of deck and theme. Even some of those topping deck lists that a lot of people were just calling Renji Rush, in my definition of the deck, I wouldn't call it a Renji Rush deck because it only just had 4 Renjis, and then it also ran Ichigos and the other decks, right? Or the other cards. So this, like, Renji Rush, what I mean is you're going full all in on Renji Rush and you're just trying to down 4Ks, which we've seen it be super, super strong and consistent, and I think it means it has to be in a top 32. But definitely one of those ones on the cusp of being on the end of a top 32. Bleach, 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 Bleach. We have Bambietas. I think that this is something on the outside looking in, but definitely on the top part of the outside looking in. Definitely a really strong deck. We've not seen some people playing it since its release, but there were a couple tops when the deck came out, and then I think 1 week after that, so I would be negligent to not at least include it on the list as a very strong, viable deck. But I think that I would consider it on the outside looking in, something they maybe don't want to take to a huge tournament. But this video is not to discourage anyone trying to take any kind of deck. I think any deck could do really, really well if you take enough time to believe in it and work really hard on your matchups. But we'll say that that one's on the outside looking in, not getting any tops in this upcoming regional tournament. So staying with Bleach, going through here, none of those are Bleach decks. We did the Renji Rush, no Bleach, no Bleach, and we are on the Green Boy, Toshiro. I do think that Toshiro is still a really strong deck, and I think that me putting him here was a hot take last time. I had a lot of people make some comments about Toshiro. Why is he in top 16? And we saw a Toshiro get top 4 in the recent regional, right? But it was the only one in the top 32, so I feel very comfortable still keeping Toshiro here in that kind of top 16-ish tier, because I do think the deck has everything viable going its way to still be a top 16 deck. The blue Bleach decks, based off of results, right, we didn't see any of these top in the last 2 really, really big tournaments. I do still think that they are really, really strong decks, and, you know, if I go based off of just what people are playing, what the meta is telling us, and try not to put my opinions in it too much, if it was up to me, I still keep these at the top of this top 16 top tier, but I do think that I would just throw them to the bottom of this tier because they are still really, really strong, and I do believe in them. And even though none of them got a top 32 finish, I still think that these are really strong decks that if people want to take, whichever version and build that you want to build, they are still just super, super powerful. I think a lot of people are just overlooking kind of what these decks can do. Bleach, 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 and Purple Bleach. No surprise, it's top 5. It's staying top 5. It's staying really, really strong. I will kind of organize these a little bit, I guess, to show that codegeass is probably going down a little bit. But yeah, it's still a top 5 deck. This deck is really, really strong, and you definitely need to look out for Purple Bleach, especially, you know, the different builds that people play. I do think that the Squad Zero package is the most consistent with the consistent removal, but I do think that if you take the straight Ichigo package, you have a little bit higher of a clearing 5K bodies, I'll just say that, as opposed to being stuck at the 4K for a while. Now, got Bleach out of the way. That are all the Bleach decks. I think that they can sit pretty good there. And let's just touch on codegeass next, I guess, to say that. Purple Code, I do still think is one of the best decks in the format. I will put it down here on the bottom of one of the best decks. I think that if there is a deck that is the epitome of like good, strong things you can do in unionarena while not doing anything super updated and crazy, I do think that Purple codegeass is still one of those decks. And if you think that this deck can't win a tournament, I think that you are wild. I've seen a lot of people say that this is just, you know, a fringe deck now, or even a rogue tier deck, but it did get a top in the top 32. And, you know, some of these best deck formats are decks that I'm putting up here that I think can absolutely win a tournament. And I still believe in Purple Bleach enough, or Purple codegeass enough, the Godway package, to keep it in one of the best decks in the format. And I know that this is a hot take I've taken compared to a lot of people. A lot of people have this outside of their top 10 decks as not one of still the best decks in the game. But I keep seeing this deck perform really, really well at locals, and anytime people play it, you will hear a lot of players still complain about, like, wow, that deck is still really strong, but at the same time, a lot of people are just not as scared about the deck, and it didn't get any new tools for people to have to think about in their matchups. So with that being said, a deck like this that has just been out for a while and you know, has everything figured out about it, it makes it a little bit harder for you to, you know, try to outplay your opponents because they know all the cards that you're going to play in the deck, right? So it makes it a little bit harder. Codegeass, obviously the green Golden Boy Suzaku. If I had to pick, I would still keep it kind of in this particular order. I still believe, you know, very fully in Blue JJK and Roy Mustang a ton as being a little bit more consistent than Suzaku. And to be completely honest, I'll probably keep it in this order. I think you could put all of these top 4. Spoilers going to be another card deck who goes in this top 4 to make it a top 5 split for some of the best decks. But any order you want to put those are understandable, and I think that all 4 of these decks being some of the best decks in the game make it where it's such a healthy meta to be in. Codegeass decks, I think those should be the only 2 on the list, right? Going down, Codegeass, oh, Ashford Academy. Ashford Academy got a lot of support. I think it is still a solid rogue tier gatekeeper-ish deck. A lot of people were playing it before the regional, and there was a decent amount of people on the deck in the regional, and I think that it is still a rogue tier keeper of the format deck. I will put it a little bit above some of the other control decks, like the Hashiras and Greenbat and Garo, kind of control-y-ish mid-tier decks that I like a lot. I think it's probably just a little bit faster now with some of the support it got, but I do still definitely believe in the Homunculus and the Greed package and the Marioliona to be kind of on the top tier of a rogue kind of gatekeeper deck. I do think that these decks, if they see enough decent hands, they can go toe-to-toe even with some of the best decks in the game, and I think that that's the epitome of a rogue tier kind of deck that you would want to take into a tournament, right? Depending on your matchups, you might just wall out Marioliona and Greed against certain matchups, and then in other matchups, not having enough decent blockers, sometimes Wrath is just enough to come down with the double attacker. So I will keep them at the top of this kind of Gatekeeper rogue tier deck. But finishing on the Codegeass decks, I think that Ashford Academy is still a Gatekeeper rogue tier deck. I wouldn't be surprised if one snuck at the top 32, but I think that the base of the deck is so strong that it has to be really, really consistent of a deck. Alright, that is all the Codegeass decks I want to touch on. Let's just talk about Onepunchman since we're down here at the moment. I will keep Metal Bat and Garo down here in this Gatekeeper rogue tier deck. These are both really, really strong decks, very respectable decks. A lot of really good pilots are on these decks, and they both offer very different aspects of a mid-tier mid kind of level game where if you start off slow against each of these decks, they really can just rush you down. I just think that both of them lack some of the tools to consistently probably beat some of the top 5 decks coming in, especially with how diverse the top 5 or 6 decks are in the format. I consider like the Nanami, Sukuna, I'll keep them separated, but they're kind of the same deck, whichever version you want to run. I consider them both the same kind of tier-ish deck, being some of the best decks in the game, but I think that they kind of struggle to consistently beat those, where you definitely can if you see certain lineups. And really with Metal Bat, especially if they start really slow and you are just controlling them down, they don't get a chance, but the chances of you starting a little bricky compared to them is a little bit higher. Onepunchman, let's see. Speedo Sound Sonic, I think, has to come down into this Gatekeeper rogue tier-ish level. Definitely on the bottom of it. I think that it's had some decent showing in tournaments, not really regionals, but I do think it is a really strong aggro deck, but it's still not the best aggro deck. I do think that if you're going to play an aggro deck and you really wanted to play one and you didn't care what the IP was, I think that you should go with Blue Sword Art Online, because in my opinion, that one and the Fushiguro are a little bit better than this deck at the moment with what they can do, but it's still a really cool deck. And a lot of times, you know, I think with Toto being in the format and being such a strong deck, one of the top 5 or 6 decks for sure, makes it a little bit hard for Speedo Sound Sonic 2, because you make them switch. Now he's up there able to get blocked or killed, and it makes it harder for you to keep that Speedo Sound Sonic alive that is essential to your combos in the deck, right? Green, Onepunchman Saitama, definitely a top 16. I'm going to keep him right here where he's at. I don't think he's one of the best decks in the format. We did see, I think, 2 different copies of this, or 1 copy of this and 2 of the yellow Onepunchmans kind of sneak into there. And with that being said, I think that I will probably still keep the Espers down here. Like I said, it takes a really good pilot, and you seeing a lot of stuff and not bricking with the espers. It's still definitely a top 16 deck. I think it's really, really strong. But if I had to pick one Punch Man deck to take to a tournament and like try to really push for a top 16 finish, it would be the yellow One Punch Man Saitama. Once again, a little consistency issues considering how consistent the top 6 decks are, but definitely the best One Punch Man deck, I think, and the most consistent that you could take into a format. And now, while I don't think it's one of the best decks in the format, I think it is right there on the cusp. And if you wanted to throw it in there, I feel like you definitely could, especially based off of the last tournament results for this deck. It's just so strong, so consistent, and I think it's a great example of like, if this deck just high rolls too, it's kind of crazy. But I think it is a really good deck. Definitely, I would not be sad to put it in the top, or just be right here at the top of. Definitely going to be a top 16 in this tournament for sure. Alright, those are all the One Punch Man decks. I'm going to try to go in order a little bit. Obviously, the HunterxHunter decks I'll do last because they're newer. I try to typically do that, even though that came out beforehand. But going down the line, I guess we could touch on JJK next. Like I said, I think the outside looking in is going to be the red Itadori Yuji deck with his companions. I do think this deck is really strong and a lot stronger than a lot of people think, but I do think it would be something on the outside looking in. Going into a big tournament, I wouldn't be surprised if someone took it, but I would be very, very surprised if one got a, like, X2 finish, because the deck is a little inconsistent, but what it can do is pretty strong stuff at times. JJK. Let's see. Fushiguro. Okay. So, yeah, I took a lot of the JJK decks off because obviously they've not done a lot. They haven't done anything crazy cool. So, like I said, there were a lot of decks I took off this list to make room for some of the new cards to make it not so convoluted. But I still really believe in Fushiguro. I know a lot of people don't. I think that I would have to put it in the rogue tier-ish level now. Just too much of it not showing up. I know there's a couple pilots that try really, really hard. I have been told that a couple of the matchups, especially into the Roy Mustang, is a little hard because they are really easy able to kill your elephant and a lot of other things off the board, and you're not able to get more than one turn out of them. The same thing with the purple bleach, being able to control it down as well. Now, I think that the matchup into Suzaku is really strong, so maybe Fushiguro will have some time to show up and succeed. And I guess if I had to pick an order of like these decks to how well I think someone would do in a tournament and toppings, I'm going to organize this a little bit better. I'll wait to touch the HunterxHunter decks. But I think that Fushiguro is an epitome of a rogue tier deck. It does some really, really strong things. It can make some very interesting matchups into some of the top decks. And if you don't know what the deck does, you can just get absolutely destroyed, especially if they see the dogs early in there. But if you do play against this in one of the regional tournaments, just watch out. Don't let them keep the dogs on the board, because that is a really important part of their combo piece. That may be the last JJK deck outside of the top ones that we've already touched on, and I think that is so, yeah. But obviously, blue JJK is still one of the best decks in the format. This order doesn't matter particularly much. If I had to pick, I'm just considering that I think that the blue JJK decks will, on average, get more tops than these other decks, is what I'm trying to say. But I don't think any deck is the best deck, but these are the best decks, and I think that whichever version of the deck you want to run, I think that the tier level of how high they are is about the same. It's just preference on what you like to do in the game, right? I would say, like, if I had to pick at the moment, I would put the Nanami down a little bit lower than the just straight up Sukuna Yuji build. I know a lot of people told me not to clump stuff, so I'll try to keep it separated. If I had to pick, this is a little less viable at the moment, only because Suzaku can put so much damage on you early. You might not get to the coveted 15 cards left for you to be able to get the overtime with your Nanami. So if I had to separate it, yes, I would say that this version is a little bit weaker, but still definitely one of the best decks, whereas the blue JJK is still one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the game and most consistent. That's all the JJK decks. What is another one? Let's go Demon Slayer, right? So Demon Slayer, none at the bottom. The trio deck, as much as I like this deck, I think it is getting outdated a little bit, whereas before I thought it was a really solid rogue gatekeeper-ish tier deck. I think at the moment now it's just a little too slow, a little inconsistent. This is also like Tengen versions of the deck. I will keep it here on the bottom of the gatekeeper rogue tier deck because it just has so many good raid cards and strong cards in it for me to not think that it's still a really strong deck. But if I had to pick, I would say I would probably not bring this to a tournament, and I'd put it on the same tier as kind of the Bambi, where Bambi has a lot of good raid cards now too, but a lot of them just don't do enough to make a humongous impact on the game to consistently kind of get you in some of those spots. Demon Slayer. What else we got? The Hashiras. I love the Hashiras. They're so cool. I think that I will have to put them on the outside looking in. I know that this is going to make a couple of guys that I know that play the decks. Sorry, Aaron. I do think that if like a player like him, like a really good player on the Hashiras, took it to a tournament and they got a random top 32 or fringe top 36 deck, I would not be surprised, because I do still really strongly believe in this deck, but I do want to be a little more critical on performance as well, right? This is a little bit of me trying to give you all some projections of random decks to watch out for so you're not getting surprised by them, but I still really, really believe in Hashiras. I just think they're a little too slow at the moment for what they offer, and they don't have some of the same control aspects that Metal Bat is seemingly to be a little bit stronger in the game. I think the Nullify Impact is a big part, and just being able to keep impact. And with the same thing being said, I would probably have to move Garo about on the outside looking in. I think Garo is lacking a little bit too. Garo does have a high ceiling though. Later in the game, he does get a little bit stronger for you to be able to, you know, put some pressure on your opponent. But I do want to even this chart out. Oh no, who did I grab? Oh, Regirush. A little bit more evened out so it's not so spread out, and you guys have a little bit more of me, you know, kind of giving all the decks some love. And I want to really hone in on this, you know, top-ish level, so I'm not just giving you guys a lot of decks that you're not going to see or talk about too much, right? So where were we at? Sorry. Oh, Demon Slayer. Boom, boom, boom. None of these are Demon Slayer. Tanjiro and Nezuko, right? Not performing well, not getting a lot of tops, and kind of struggling. And with that being said, I'm going to move them out of one of the best decks in the format. I think having to see those pieces, I'll move it below Toshiro. I'll put it on the same tier, I think, as, you know, the Snipe green SAO deck, even though not a lot of people are playing this. I still believe in that. I think I'll probably just, let's just touch on it while we're here. I'll move it down kind of this, like, just behind the blue bleach decks. But Tanjiro Nezuko, I do still think is a deck worthy of a top 16 finish, but it just takes a really good pilot, and I don't think I can move it into anything, I guess, compare it to decks that do the same thing, right? If I had to compare this, would I take this deck over Goddess or Blue SAO? And in that sense, I probably would not. So I would put it in a top 32. I'm not going to keep it in top 16. It's probably a deck you don't really want to need to look out too much for. But if you see it, you want to know about it, you want to know what it does, it's a really strong deck, and you should look out for it. But I can't keep it up there with the lack of performance it is. And I definitely believe in this deck, but a lot of people know now to just clear the Nezukos, and the deck does fall apart a little bit more. With that being said, that puts Demon Slayer kind of in a tough spot in the meta, right? Which is to be expected, because we haven't gotten the Demon Slayer Volume 2 yet, and once that happens, I think a lot of these decks get that little bit of a boost they need to make them hyper competitive again. But at the moment, I do think a lot of the Demon Slayer decks are kind of lacking in some of the power that we are expecting in the current state of the game, especially with some of the decks that do some similar things having gotten updated. Outside of the One-Punch-Man decks, like those, the power level came in, we got those that were exclusive to us, right? So the power level compared to some of these other sets that have came out, One-Punch-Man will stand the test of time a little bit better than some of the decks that we knew their power level when it came out in Japan compared to here. Demon Slayer, we've done JJK, right? We did JJK, but I didn't touch on the Toto. So let's touch on Toto real quick. He is definitely one of the top 6 decks in the game. If I had to really pick, I would put Toto above Purple Bleach, mainly from the matchups that you'll see into Suzaku, and I will keep the Blue JJK and Roy Mustang ahead of both of those two, right? Because I do think that Blue JJK and Roy Mustang are more consistent than Suzaku and Toto and Purple Bleach, while also having aspects to win the game and control the board at the same time. Where I do think that Toto eats well a lot more off of beating the Suzaku matchup, and whereas Suzaku has a little bit better time probably beating the Purple Bleach. But that's just my quick take on that. I forgot to mention Toto in the JJK talks, along with the Nanami being on just like that outside of the top like 5 or 6 decks, but still really strong. That is that. I guess the next one we talk about is going to be the Sword Art Online. Coming through here. The Integrity Knights, right? Like, this is a good deck, and so is Goddess deck. I think I will keep both of them kind of where they're at. I will say that the Goddess version of the deck with the Integrity Knights package is definitely performing more than the Integrity Knights deck, but I would definitely have to put it on the top of the, you know, top 32 tier ish deck. If one of these sneaks in top 32, I will not be surprised, and I am keeping the Goddess right here in 4th place on the top 16 because I really believe in this deck. It's very, very powerful, it's very fast, very consistent, and I think that you could just win against a lot of decks before they can get going. And if any deck starts slow against this deck, you are eating really, really well. You definitely need to look out for the Goddess deck. I think these two particular yellow SAO decks doing so well is going to make a lot of people be more aware of them. And I think that that will probably hurt their matchups. A lot of people are probably going to play test a lot more into these matchups. And I think that one of the big boogeymans coming into the format, along with Toto messing with your energy line, does kind of hurt both of these decks, especially the full Integrity Knight version, because it is a little bit more susceptible to needing that 5 energy. But the low to the ground 3 or 4 energy Goddess deck is very fast, very powerful, and we've seen it perform really well. So well enough that I can't put it, you know, outside of the top 16. I think it definitely gets a top 16 finish. It's so strong, and you can look for this deck to do really, really well. SAO, with that being said, I love Blue Sword Art Online. I will take it out of one of the best decks in the format. I will put it, you know, just behind the Goddess deck. I think that I can't do that. I know that it hasn't gotten as many tops, but this is the premier aggro deck. I keep telling people about it. I think that it's because it takes a lot of the people, this is not offense to anyone, a lot of people who play these aggro decks don't want to think about it a lot, right? They just want to swing in, get big swings in, not have to think too much about it, but you have to think a lot about the Kirito Asuna and which one you have in which spot on your line, because that determines how aggressive you can be in the game, and it's really, really hard to do. But I think that if you don't do any testing against Blue Sword Art Online, then you will be very, very upset with yourself, and I'm telling you, this deck is very powerful. Please, if you're thinking about playing this deck at a big tournament, just do it. So that way I can say that it got a top, and I don't have to take as much flack for keeping it in one of the top decks. It's definitely not one of the best decks in the format. We've seen aggro or hyper aggro like these kind of take a wayside of control meta we're in at the moment. But I do still believe in this deck, and I can't take it out of the top 16-ish tier because I think it is really, really strong and it has the power to do it. I do think that it just takes a pilot, and I don't want to hurt a deck from how good it is based off of how good the pilot needs to be as well, right? But that is all the SAO decks. I guess next we need to touch on Black Clover. So going through Black Clover decks, none on the outside looking in. If it's not on here, it's probably because I took it off the list. Black Clover. So Mario Leona. I like Mario Leona a lot. But like I said, I'm trying to trim this up because we have to make room for some of these other decks coming on. I do think Mario Leona should be on the outside looking in, kind of in the same tier as Garo and the Hashira decks. And with, like I said, you know, Metal Bat is an exception to these 4 different decks, right? Like Mario Leona, Hashira, Garo, and Metal Bat. I usually keep all kind of grouped together, but I do think that Metal Bat has a little bit stronger of legs to stand on because the deck can be a little bit more lenient and versatile in the support package that it takes, and it doesn't take as much energy to get going as some of these decks. I do think that if Hashira's had a raid target, it'd be really, really high up in the tiers, but we'll keep Metal Bat at about the same level of, I think, like the new like deck that is kind of like Mario Leona that I think is a little bit better is the new Greed deck. If you haven't seen this deck play, it's really strong and you need to get some testing against it. I would not be surprised if someone got a, you know, top 32 random, top 36, 40 something, you know, ranking with Greed, because it is very, very powerful. Alright, the purple Asa deck I think has to come down in the rogue tier deck, and I'm going to put it along the same lines as the Ashford Academy, doing similar things but lower bodies low to the ground, decently consistent, definitely a deck that is powerful enough to get a random top here, but I think that it's just on that rogue gatekeeper tier, on the fringe of making it into a top 32, but probably just missing out, but definitely a deck that is super powerful, consistent, and low enough to the ground that if you don't watch out for it, it can do really well. I just think that it doesn't have enough to really get over some of the top decks, whereas some of these other decks in the kind of upper part of the Gatekeeper Rogue Tier deck, I think can definitely win some matchups in the top decks. Black Clover. What else do we got? The 3 Ladies in Red. Definitely still a top 16. Not one of the best decks of the format. We've seen it get, you know, up there in the tops, not a top 16 or top 10 or anything like that, but I still really strongly believe in this deck. I think it takes a big pilot, and in the same sense of the, you know, Esper sister deck, I think it's along the same level of this deck. A little easier to pilot, but with a higher ceiling than the Esper Sister deck. I think that the impact, making your opponent have to block 5k body, is really, really strong, but you are dealing with that 5 energy, and sometimes the top decks can just wall you out with all their aspects of the game that they can do to force you early if they high roll, and you really just can't have a lot of ways to come back into it. But I think that the 5k body does give you a little bit more aspect to lean on. Really good deck. Really, really strong. I like this deck a lot. The red Asta deck. Now, this one I think is kind of a disappointment in the community. It did get a recent, really strong topping. I still think that it is one of the best decks in the format. It's really, really strong. It do some good stuff. I think a lot of people that are playing this deck, though, have been super upset about us not having the double energy Asta, but we're getting that card back. And I'm not sure if it comes out before the upcoming regional, but if it does, that makes this deck even better. So I think it definitely stays as one of the best decks in the format. This deck you do have to think a little bit about as well, so it's a little bit harder in a long day of tournaments to really stay focused and make sure you don't misplay with this deck, but it's definitely one of the best decks in the game. It's really, really strong, very consistent, and can just, really demolish you if you're not ready for it. And I think it definitely a little bit more legs to stand on than the purple codegeass deck at the moment, just having some newer, updated-ish tools in the game. That codegeass, the purple Gawain deck, is lacking a little bit, right? But that is all the black clovers, and I think that is all the IPs that we've had to go over so far. We've touched on just about all of them. We did miss, Attack on Titan and the last codegeass. I did miss the blue codegeass on this when we were going through codegeass. Definitely one of the decks that I am a little upset to see not do very well. Definitely a high tier gatekeeper rogue tier deck. Very strong stun mechanic in the deck, but definitely not as consistent as the Toshiro. The Toshiro being a flat, your opponent's energy line can't restand, is so powerful, and running a deck that wants to do something similar but doesn't have that same just keep all of it tapped down is a little bit, harder to keep up with, and just having Kimpachi package in your Toshiro makes this so much more viable too. And I think that this deck is just missing another little oomph in the deck, but I think it's still a very solid rogue tier deck with a lot of good raid targets and good cards you can run. And I think that that's why, it, Fushiguro, the Homunculus, and the Greed all kind of sit on this solid rogue tier decks, where I would not be surprised if they got a top 32 finish, whereas some of the ones down here at the bottom, maybe I would be. But yeah, let's go to Attack on Titan. Outside looking in, Attack on Titan here. So you can see I was pretty high on the Attack on Titan decks, right? I took off the green ones. I said that earlier. I am very disappointed in the Attack on Titan players. If you guys did not hear in my last video, where are the Attack on Titan players? This is a very hyped set. It did really well in sales. I know a lot of people were super stoked about it, but a lot of people were just not taking it into the tournaments. If you like playing Suzaku, play Assault Titan as well. It's similar. Maybe not as much recursion, maybe a little bit more aggressive. Very easy to keep your energy afloat longer than I think in Suzaku. It's a really strong deck, but based off of performance, right? Like I don't know if I can keep it in this, highs up and tier. I can't. It's got to go down, I think, in the rogue tier. Like I said, I want to keep the top 32 a little more in line of like 32 decks, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And based off what we got going on, I may move it back up. I do think that it's still a really, really strong deck. And I'll keep it in the top 32. I really believe in this deck. I really, really do. I think this is a strong deck. It does a lot. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone got a top 32 with it. Because it does play similar to Suzaku. Just believe in me. If you are a Attack on Titan fan and you want to play a build 'em up deck, take this deck. I think you'll do fine, because if Suzaku's doing pretty well in the meta at the moment, even though he needs 8 energy and you need a lot of energy too, I think that this deck is in a good spot in the meta, where a lot of these aggro decks have a hard time getting over some of the top decks in the format, where you won't see as many of those bad matchups. And I think that this deck could perform well in a upcoming regional. Levi is a humongous disappointment, and he is definitely going down, I think, on the outside looking in. I know that's a big drop for me thinking it'll be top 32. The deck is way more inconsistent than I thought it would be. The ceiling is definitely there. Like, Levi could, if you just saw all the amazing hands, do really, really well and get a top 10 finish. I wouldn't be crazy surprised, but I'd be like, wow, what were your hands like? How lucky did you get throughout the tournament? But I do think that a Levi deck is on the outside looking in. It just takes a lot to do what like a deck like Fushiguro can do, but it's so much harder to get these big plays off. Fushiguro and Tandro Nezuko a little lower to the ground with how aggro you want to be. Definitely Swordartonline a better, more consistent aggro deck, and I think that Levi is just a little too inconsistent and takes a little too much build up to stay very, very competitive in the meta at the moment. And who I thought was going to be the star of the show, Historia, also very disappointing, but I cannot take her out of the top 32. I think that this deck is just absolutely too consistent. I do believe in this deck. I think that you should be scared of this deck with how consistent it is too. And if they can get the Ymir and the Historia down early enough on turn 3, and they're constantly swinging at you with all these aggressive bodies, I think it's a lot to look out for. I think it is, you know, a little less risky than a goddess deck. Maybe not as powerful and low to the ground, but more consistent and a little less risky without not having to take your life. This deck is good. It's really good. I don't know why it's not performing very well, but I really believe in this being one of the, you know, top 32 placing decks in the game at the moment. It's just very surprised. If I had to pick one thing to be surprised about out of any new deck that had not performed well in a big tournament, it's going to be Historia. And I think that this deck is insane, and maybe I could just be biased. We have a really good pilot, Will, at our local card shop, who plays this deck really well, and I've seen just how consistent it is every game. Now, you do break randomly. It's very seldom and off the few that you do, but this deck is really strong. It's just so consistent that I don't think that it could be anywhere less than like the Renji Rush-ish kind of tier, because you just are so consistent. I think that's all the Attack on Titans deck. No Attack on Titan deck making it into the top 16 or top 32. I don't think any of them are consistent or powerful enough to do it. If I had to pick one of the two, it would be Historia or Attack on Titan, or the Attack Titan deck. But I think with that being said, we are pretty deep into the video. Y'all know these videos usually always go pretty long. I always have a lot to say, but this is how I would resituate everything in the current state of the meta without adding the new decks into it, right? And I think that this would be a pretty solid, you know, step to go off of. I'll find some way to screenshot this part of it, I guess, to be able to take this and then where we add the new decks onto the list. So we have a new different IP into the card game. It is, you know, Rurouni Kenshin, and then HunterxHunter did get updated as well. So I do want to touch up on the HunterxHunter decks that are currently on the list from before. And Gone and Friends, I think it is a strong Gatekeeper Rogue tier deck. It did get a lot of support. I will say I think that it is about the same as these other decks. I put it on the same tier of like the Homunculus. There's a lot of different ways to build it. You have a lot of different creative ways to do your deck building. I think that there are a lot of instances of having a 5k body and impact that make it really, really strong. But I think that it is just still like a rogue tier deck. I don't know if it would sneak in any tops. I'm working on some deck lists with it. I feel like it could sneak into a top 32 finish, and I will put it there. I am favoritism to HunterxHunter, right? And with that being said, the other green boy, I am putting Kurapika down here on the bottom of the top 32. I still believe in Kurapika, right? I do think that he's outdated. I think that his support was horrible, but not absolutely trash. It does a little bit more for the deck than I thought it would be. You should be worried about Kurapika. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to give away, you know, too many tips about it, because I am planning to probably play, y'all know how I play Kurapika, take it to a tournament. But I do think that if you can see consistent enough hands with Kurapika, he can still beat any deck in the format. And any deck that has a ceiling like that, I think that it is absolutely still viable for it to get a top 32 finish, because we saw in the last regional particular people not seeing certain matchups right being a big part of why they got tops. Not that they didn't play very well, but sometimes your matchups come in clutch. And I think that if Kurapika can avoid a couple of his bad matchups, which I do think are like the Goddess deck and Fushiguro, I do think it does really well in the top 5 decks, like, you know, the Blue JJKs, your Blue Roy, everything like that. But Toto is a horrible matchup for you, and it feels really, really, really bad to play against a Toto, and Toto is so popular right now because he does so well well in Suzaku, right? And if he does well into Suzaku, then he does crazy well into Kurapika. But I do think that the green HunterxHunter deck is something you should look out for, and if one of them sneaks into the top 32, I think it's very viable because both these decks have enough support now to still be really strong, consistent decks in the game. And I want to see more people playing the Gone and Friends deck because there's so many ways you could build this deck, and it's honestly the hardest part about this deck is how many different ways and cards you have. It makes it hard to hone in on what exactly makes the deck crazy powerful, right? I do think the new color trigger helps it out a lot. Now you could take out that double action point color trigger. It makes the deck way more consistent, way better. It feels a lot better to play it, honestly. And I do think this deck has a little bit more legs to lay on. And if I had to actually make more of a hot take, I really believe in this deck. I think someone may build this deck and it could do pretty well, and I'll move it up into that same kind of tier as the Integrity Knights because I think it could do some similar stuff as it. I definitely believe in it a little bit more than Kurapika. And if I had to go on out, put my leg out for a HunterxHunter deck, that one of the green ones, it would be Gone and Friends. I think it is really strong. Bomber. Bomber got some support, and I think a lot of people, I keep saying a lot of people, my friends that I know that play this deck are really, really hyped about the support. And I take their opinions very strongly. And they believe that they can top with this deck. And if they believe that, I take what they say into high regard. They do a lot of testing. The couple of guys I know that play this hardcore. Bomber, I think, will get a top 32 in the next upcoming regionals. It is really, really strong. The way that you can absolutely destroy Suzaku early on, you just don't touch the mech. You kill all their other cards, you don't touch the mech, you let the mech do the work, you block with the Nullify Impact, and you can beat Suzaku really hard. Now, your harder matchups are definitely going to be Roy and the blue Bleach because they do control you back and are a little bit more consistent. And these decks do kind of what Bomber does, but a little bit better. That's why they're, high tier decks. But I think that Bomber is a, solid rogue-ish kind of tier, top 32, could sneak in deck. And you will be very sad if you don't test into any Bombers and you're playing one of the top decks, you don't know what it does. Be on the lookout, test against this. This deck is strong. Alright. Those are all the HunterxHunter decks that are currently on the list from last time, right? They're the 3 HunterxHunter decks that we believed in a little bit, and now we have to go to what decks got touched up on, right? We have a lot of new stuff for these decks. I think that both the yellow decks sit in a very strong rogue tier-ish control-y level of decks. I think that if either of these decks see a decent hand against you, you should be really scared. I think that now that I'm looking at it, I would put Fushiguro below them and the Stun codegeass deck a little bit below them, and put the Homunculus, Gone, and Razor decks in this strong rogue tier deck. These decks, I know HunterxHunter doesn't get a lot of love. It was one of the first sets. It was the first set we got along with Bleach, and a lot of people probably just aren't thinking about HunterxHunter, but both of these decks are really strong. The Gone is a 4-drop. If you have Hisoka and Kilo out, 6k body. Take with that what you will. But I think that that makes it really strong into some of the top decks alone, having that 6k body, because outside of Suzaku, a lot of them can't deal with the Gone. And it is a lot of setup to get the Gone down to do that, but regardless, as long as you have Killua out, he will have impact when he attacks and be a 5k body, which is insanely strong for a 4k body to come down. It's a strong rogue tier deck. I think it is really, really strong. It takes a little bit more setup than I think the Green Gone deck does. I think the Green Gone deck is a little more consistent, but the ceiling for this deck is insanely high. And with that being said, the Razor deck is crazy low ceiling. You get to run 14 of your 0-drops, and that alone makes it so consistent and strong. I think it does deal with trying to stay with 5 energy. That is a little harder for the deck to manage, and is what holds it back a little bit, but it's because Razor's so strong. And this deck is really solid. And if you're a HunterxHunter fan, which I am, y'all know I am, these decks are good now. All the HunterxHunter decks are good. Every single one of these decks will be going into the, roguish, kind of close to tier-ish deck, and I wouldn't be surprised if anyone took any of these HunterxHunter decks and did pretty well with them. But with that being said, the specified slot Gone deck, it's good. This is going to make us have to move some of these other decks down, right? I think that if I had to pick the purple Asa deck coming down on the outside looking in. For sure, I'd have to move that one down. I want to make this a little bit more even, like I said. I'm going to jump out of order on here because this will make this a lot easier. And if people don't watch the video past this point, whatever. Kenshin, top 5 deck. For sure. This is going to make it easier for me to see how to fill in these other slots. Kenshin is amazing. Double attack, impact, switches your opponent's characters to their energy line when they block and lose a battle to you, so they don't die, so you get to manipulate the energy line, but you do that in the same sense that, you know, Aoi Todo could do, but you're lower to the ground because you only need 4 energy, and it is very, very, very consistent. I think a lot of people are foreseeing this being the best deck in the format. I think that it'll have to contest with a lot of these other decks. I don't think that there is a very clear best deck in the format. I think it slots into this current meta we got, and to be completely honest, I think this deck pushes down Todo and Suzaku a little bit. And it will be played probably, these 3 decks will probably be played the most. Blue JJK, Roy, and Kenshin, and I think that Kenshin helps take out some of the Suzaku and Todos, which will help Blue JJK and Roy do a little bit better. I know this is probably the part I should say for the end. This is the most important information about this, but I think that, you know, Kenshin, Roy, and Yuji will be the top 3 decks. Kenshin helps both of these decks out by clearing out the Suzakus and the Todo matchups that they would potentially see on the higher tier tables. Alright, most important part out of the way. Now y'all hear me talk about the decks I love a lot, because now this will make it a little bit easier to put all these decks in here, right? I do think that Illumi got a lot of support. This is the Illumi Zoldit family deck. This deck is really good. I like this deck a lot. I am practicing with this deck a lot. It may be a deck I try to take to regionals. That's how much I believe in the draw power and the damage 2 that the Illumi offers in the deck. The new Raid Killua does a lot. The only thing I'm upset about is that the new color trigger Illumi did not need to be a color trigger. We already had a perfect color trigger in the deck. Maybe not so much believe in it being a top 32, but definitely a good solid rogue tier deck that you will need to look out for. Someone may be taking this deck. You get slapped with the damage to draw a card when they kill your bodies. You're going to be pretty upset about it if you didn't have someone tell you about it, which is why I'm telling you about it. Yeah, that deck, I believe in it. You get a lot of draw power. You get to target opponents' characters. Say if they die, you draw cards. You have cards that directly let you kill those cards. I'm working on a deck profile for this that I think is really consistent and strong. And once I figure it out, I'll let you know, guys know how the testing goes with it. The Phantom Troop. This deck is hard to build. It is another rogue tier-ish deck with very good control aspects. I think if I had to put it down, Ashford Academy down, and Speedo Sound Sonic on the bottom, and all these decks kind of sit at a control-y kind of rogue tier-ish level. I would put Gone above, probably below. I'll put it situated like that a little bit. But yeah, Phantom Troop is cool. I think it is one of the most creative decks that you could build in the game. I think that it takes a pilot to make this deck really, really good. If I had to say, though, very analytical part of it, it's probably, you know, plays a lot like the Hashiras, but now you have raid targets in the deck. I think that it's really good. It's a really cool bottom of the rogue tier-ish deck. It's solid. I wouldn't be surprised if a hardcore player brought it into a top 32. I just think these decks that take a lot of creative deck building require a lot of work in Union Arena, and we haven't seen Union Arena really pay off the people who play these really hard to build, very creative decks, because there are just so many decks you can play that are good, right? So it makes the decks like this a little bit harder to deal with. I think that decks like this do a lot better when the meta is just like 2 decks you got to think that are the 2 best decks, and go on from there. But it is really strong. I'm very happy for a lot of people who are Phantom Troop fans, because this deck is really, really good now. And I think that if you love the deck, you put the time into it, you can go to a regional and get a top 32 with it. Alright. Blue Kenshin. These decks are kind of crazy. Kenshin and his master is a big build 'em up blue deck with a high ceiling. It is really strong. It has a lot of BP. And I think that it can definitely be up here in the rogue tier deck-ish level. I think that it's probably not as powerful as the homunculus deck. I think that the double attack on the King Bradley does give you pretty decent legs to stand on, but it is a very strong deck. Really, really strong. Need to look out for it. I like this deck a lot. It's been a lot of fun testing to play with it, and it's probably just missing like something lower to the ground. I don't know what the deck's missing, but it is a really good deck. Definitely a rogue tier deck. Something you need to look out for. Sanosuke, another build 'em up deck. I'm just going to put these here just so we can make it a little bit easier and better for us to look at. Sanosuke, another build 'em up deck, a little inconsistent. I think that all the Kenshin decks are good decks. None of them are on the outside looking in. This is one of the sets that is definitely power creep in Union Arena. The epitome of it, because we got the new cards in each color that say you can, you know, well, not each color. Essentially each color, like that you can play this card if you have 0, right? Like you can play it. It's a 2-drop that you could play while you have no cards, and it will generate you energy. But just early on, if you see those cards in your hand, you drop it down turn 1 on the front line, and now you have a big body that is playing off. But that makes all these decks very, very powerful and consistent. I think that the Aoi Todo deck is your super aggro deck, combo deck. Definitely on the bottom of the rogue tier level-ish decks. I think that Sanosuke could be up here kind of around Metal Bat level or greed level with that big payoff at the energy high levels with a bunch of damage. I think that if I had to pick a sleeper out of these to be really, really strong, it would be Hajime Saito. I think that this deck is really cool, really strong with the snipe, very consistent. I'm gonna have to boost some decks up, right? So since he is contention, I'll put him up here in the top of the rogue tier deck. And I do think that the purple bad guy deck is really strong too. Definitely really decent. Move Speed of Sound down, Ashford Academy down, Metal Bat down a little bit. Still a really strong deck. I believe in Greed a little bit more than Metal Bat. Probably put the Phantom Troop down there as well. I do think that the specified slot Hunter deck is really strong and very, very consistent, but it just doesn't do anything to win the game as fast. And I think that that's what this deck is still missing, but it does feel really good to play now. Very strong, consistent deck. Probably how I would situate these a little bit. Yeah, for the most part. So this is what we have going on with the tier list. And what would I move up? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Because we need 32 decks. I try to keep it that way. And if I had to move something in the top 16 into one of the best decks in the format, I would have to pick Fushiguro. If I had to move up Fushiguro or One-Punch-Man Saitama, I will probably move up Fushiguro. And even now that I'm looking at it, I would put Fushiguro above the Asta and Purple Codegeass deck, because he does have the control aspect that really can just shut down a lot of people. And, you know, these control decks cannot kill Kenpachi, which makes it so strong. I think that as long as you can see a lot of these top matchups, you're going to do really well into them. So he's definitely one of the best decks of the format, and probably a little bit above these two if I had to pick. So what can I move up into the top 16 or down below? Probably Integrity Knights. It's been really consistent, really, really strong. I think the deck is doing really well, and it can get a top 16 finish because we've seen it do it before. And to be completely honest, I would put it above the blue Bleach decks and the green SAO deck, because they have not had nearly as much good showings, even in local tournaments, compared to the Integrity Knights deck. So a top 16 on the Integrity Knights build of the deck, because the build is a little similar, but I do think that if the Goddess deck is a little bit better. So what do we move out of top 32 down to the Gatekeeper Rogue tier deck? I feel pretty good about these. If I had to pick, I would say Bradley comes up. I do believe in the Homunculus deck. I think that this is pretty hard. This is probably the hardest part of the video. I have a lot to say. These all decks I feel like are about the same level, but if I had to pick one to move up that I think could get a top 32 finish more than the others, Kurapika I think goes down below of these a little bit even more. To be honest, Attack Titan down a little bit, which moves these two up a little bit more. Rinchi Rush, same aspect. Historia, based off of showings, put her down a little bit more. Rinchi Rush probably a little bit higher up into the top 32 since it has been performing so well. Gone and Fringe just below it. I do really believe in this deck. How do I feel about moving up? I feel pretty good about this kind of order-ish here now with Renji Rush gone. Brother, sister, brother combo, control, late game, consistency, control, and who do I think would move up? I have to do this because I'm trying to do a new thing. I'm trying to be more strict about making these more in line. And if I had to pick, I will go with Hajime Saito out of the new decks. And to be completely honest, I will take down the Eren Yeager control deck and move up Fushiguro. I know that's probably out of left field. I think the Fushiguro, I keep believing in him because I think he just has so many ways to beat some of these build 'em up decks that we've seen do pretty well. I think that he does just get walled out a lot, but if I had to try to pick someone that is my wild card, it's almost always going to be Fushiguro, just with all the aggro he can put on a board. And I think that people are going to be surprised at how strong Hajime Saito is. Being able to snipe is really strong. I think that he probably takes over where Kurapika is in the aspect of being able to snipe. Move Historia down a little bit. Not as consistent and fast enough probably to keep up with the homunculus kind of tier-ish, but if people aren't going to see Hajime Saito coming, and I do really believe in this deck. It's really, really strong. I hope that one of the guys at our card shop does decide to take this to regionals, because I have a good feeling about this deck into a lot of the matchups in the current meta. I think that he can do pretty well, because being on the backline gives you a lot of safety, right? So if you don't know what this deck does, being able to snipe and attack from the backline does give you some safety, and it's also, you know, another swing, which is really, really cool. That you can do. You raid him, keep him on the back line, swing out front with all four of your other attackers, and then you come in to snipe impact with your Hajime Saito, which can sometimes just be enough to win you a game because your opponent cannot touch him from the back line. But I'll go through this really quick for anyone still hanging around. I know this is about to be an hour long, but Blue JJK, Roy Mustang, Kenshin, Suzaku, Todo, and Purple Bleach Ichigo, I think, are definitely the top 6 decks in the format that you're going to have to look out for. That is what most people are going to be playing on. I think below that you'll see Nanami, green Bleach, Toshiro Control, some purple Code, and your red Asta decks. And then from then on, there's just so many decks that you could play in the game. I do think that all of the Kenshin decks are very, very solid, and I do think that now all the Hunter decks are really strong too. But I want to know what you guys think in the comments down below. I want to hear what everyone thinks are the best decks. Give me your top 10 decks, because I'm giving you my top 10 decks right here. I think that those are the 10 best decks in the format. I think that any of the decks in the top 32 can definitely get a top 32 in a big tournament. I think that the Gatekeeper Rogue Tier decks that we have here are pretty solid. If one of them manages to sneak in, I wouldn't be surprised. But anything that's on the outside looking in, I would be a little more surprised if they snuck in. But I do respect the power level of these decks. But that is my tier list for the current game, Union Arena trading card game, and where I think the meta sits. I'll be very curious to see how we update this going into the next release for the next set, and which of these decks we take off of here, right? If I had to, you know, foresee, probably a lot of these down here will get taken off, but we'll see in the future. But like I said, leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel. Anyone that has stayed this long, I really appreciate y'all listening to me mumble and talk about the card game, because I love this card game a lot, and I hope that y'all could tell that I do, because I spend a lot of time playing it, buying it, building decks, and I have, you know, most of the decks on this list built. I have so many Union Arena trading card game decks, but I appreciate y'all. I appreciate the support. Like I said, show the channel some love. I'm stumbling to get out of this video, but peace.